and welcome back to my channel. So I'm just carrying on from where I left off last time because I got cut off. So I was just carrying on from where I finished last time when I was looking at Inside Our Minds, and I was on the second programme talking about dyslexia, and I was just wrapping up the review when I got cut off. Yeah, so I was just at a bit where Chris Packham visited GCHQ, where they're actively recruiting dyslexic people who they say have the skills required to be spies, because of a study by the charity Made by Dyslexia that found 84% of dyslexics scored above average in skills like pattern recognition and big picture thinking. And I was just talking about the dangers there of positive stereotypes, and it also makes me wonder a little bit about the reliability of this study, because I know that with ADHD, similar studies have been conducted claiming that people with ADHD are more advanced in certain skills, like, I don't know, creativity and so on. Fun enough, this finding patterns thing seems to be something they bring out with a lot of conditions. And I was just thinking about the reliability of the study, like what type of person was involved in this study, because I know that Russ Barkley has debunked certain studies that were carried out with ADHD, where there are claims made about ADHD people with ADHD being more skilled in certain areas. And Russ Barkley, do go check out his videos on Russ Barkley's channel because they're really good, where he debunked some of these claims using a lot of what do they call them? Is it meta-analysis? I think that's a word. Meta-analysis, where they look at like many studies to kind of to sort of analyse certain patterns over time, sort of thing. And and he debunked many of these claims, the claims made about ADHD. So just because there's one study that claims a certain percentage of a group have a particular skill, you do have to be quite careful not taking it at face value, because you have to think, well, has this study been replicated? You know, who was taking part in the study? Did they cherry pick certain individuals? Were these individuals, you know, from sort of middle, you know, quite kind of privileged backgrounds? You know, were they very well? What was the extent of their education? What was the extent of their cultural enrichment? All those questions. So, does this really represent people with dyslexia as a wider group? Because in order to find that out, you'd have to do peer-reviewed studies, cross-sectional analyses, you'd have to do longitudinal analyses, you have to look at it over time, you know, using as wide a range of people as possible from all across the population. That's going to take quite a lot of time to do. So be very sceptical and wary where you see one study that claims a particular percentage of a group have a particular skill. You have to be very sceptical and critical of these studies, not take them at face value. And beware the potential for positive stereotyping. That's not to say that there isn't any grain of truth in this. It may well be the case that for certain dyslexics, maybe they do sort of overcompensate because, you know, they're struggling to read and write. They might overcompensate in other areas, and maybe therefore their big picture thinking and pattern recognition in other areas not to do with reading and writing might be more developed. It's not to dispute that, but it's just to say that it's not necessarily the whole picture. You know, using that bigger picture thinking here. Apparently autistics aren't supposed to have that skill, but you know. Yes, you have to look at the bigger picture and not stereotype people, put them into boxes. And I think, as one of you said in another video, or it might have been this one actually I think it was this one, you said in the comments, you said that, yeah, there basically might be some grain of truth in it, but some people do have a particular skill that they've developed. Maybe there is a slight what's the word? Maybe there's a slightly higher possibility that people with dyslexia might have certain skills that other people might have skills that aren't seen so often in other groups. Maybe. But we mustn't be reductionistic. I think that's the word to use. We mustn't be reductionistic, because in order to develop a skill, you need to persevere. You need to want to develop that skill. This all comes down to personal choice. So even if hypothetically speaking, someone is genetically predisposed to being, say, good at something, that in and of itself doesn't mean they're going to become good at it unless they put in the effort to develop that task. So we mustn't downplay personal effort, because that basically dehumanises ultimately, and I find that very offensive personally, because I like to think of things that I'm good at are things that I've worked hard at. It's not just a simple, I have a genetic wiring, I'm predetermined to be good at a certain skill. No, I've had to put in personal effort into that. So we just have to be careful and critical of these claims. And I do feel that, ironically, in a programme that's trying to debunk stereotypes, maybe Chris Packham has inadvertently introduced some positive stereotypes, and unfortunately some people watching this programme who might not be great at critical thinking maybe, or who don't know that much about these conditions, might then jump to conclusions, and that has unfortunate consequences for people they might come across with these conditions, who then might be typecast by people who might think that they're being nice and complimentary, but actually that could be quite offensive, particularly to someone who might not necessarily have these skills, and I might think, just because you've got this condition, you must automatically be really good at this, and no, it does not work like that. Okay, so again, at the end of the programme, Chris Packham went back to meet Suki again, and she says that her thoughts are a bit like fish in a pond. One moment they are there, then they are gone, slipping out of her reach. So if someone asks her a question, even an easy one, for example, like where we're supposed to be meeting, the answer could be on the tip of her tongue, but catching that thought and saying it out aloud is a lot harder. Even simple conversations can leave her exhausted. Often by the time she's ordered her thoughts, she has forgotten what she was thinking in the first place. But she again says it just makes her creative, able to spot patterns and make connections and solve problems that others can't. So it's interesting that she says that her condition, in this case her dyslexia, gives her these extra abilities. As someone who has dyscalculia, I wouldn't say that my ability with words, my relatively advanced ability with words, if you like, relative compared to my other problems, I wouldn't ever say that that's because of my dyscalculia. So it's interesting that she says her condition has given her these extra abilities, which is quite interesting the way some people do that, whereas to me, I would actually find it quite dehumanising. I like to think that all the things I'm good at are because I've put the time and effort and energy into it. Obviously you have to be kind of interested in something in the first place to develop it, obviously. But things like creativity, that's a choice. That's a choice. We can all be creative, and we can choose to be creative, and the desire to be creative is within all of us. The difference between someone who is described as a creative individual and someone who maybe isn't so creative is simply because a person who's a creative individual at that point in time has chosen to be creative. The person who currently isn't a creative individual, that's not because they don't have creativity in them. They do. They have a latent potential to be creative. It's just that at that moment in time in their life course, they haven't yet, for whatever reason, been able to access it, or maybe they don't want to access it. But maybe at a later date, that person might turn out to be really creative. So reducing people, I just find really dehumanising, and it doesn't sit well with me at all in terms of the way I operate. I do think that we're basically creatures in the making. We can choose to be things at different points in time. We can develop, we can change. That's not to take away from innate certain predilections, if you like. You know, it's that nature-nurture debate. Obviously, I'm never ever going to be really great at maths because I have dyscalculia. That's just never going to be possible. I'm not even going to be slightly good at maths. I'm always going to be terrible at it because I have dyscalculia. So it's not denying certain innate kind of problems or predilections or whatever. It's just saying it's obviously a lot more complex and multifaceted than saying it's all down to genes or whatever, you know, or they're all determined to be a certain way, because obviously it's far more complex than that and people do change over time. I might always not be great at maths, but if I, say, wanted to try and get better at it, you know, I can improve. I'm never going to be great at it though. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the next video now, because I'd like to answer some of your comments or respond to some of your comments on these videos, okay? So moving over to video number 2 now.